there were a lot of special little things that happened along the way. Probably one of the more interesting ones is the session that Billy Gibbons and I did when I'd been down in Houston working on some projects for them, and we were through with what we were working on, and we went and had lunch at the El Dorado bar down on the west side of Houston, and we'd eaten and we were just sitting there and just talking and whatnot, and Billy and I love cars. That was one of the things that really got us together, that I was kind of into cars in a way a little bit, even before he was in a certain sense, but he liked it because I knew a lot about cars, and he was interested in the fact that I knew a lot about bands. And it's interesting because people that are in bands don't necessarily get to go to tons of concerts or get to interact with other bands. So we had a lot of fun where, he'd ask me like, what's this band like, what's that band like, kind of a thing. And we were just sitting there talking. We were talking about doing a Cream Stars car, which was another feature we did in Cream, where I'd shoot people with their cars at home or with something crazy that wasn't their car. And he told me about this thing that he had seen down in Piedras Negras, Mexico, and it was a horse-drawn car. And it was a Model A Ford that had been converted into a street taxi. And he'd seen it a couple years previous, and he asked me, he said, are you doing anything the next couple days? And I said, well, I'm not doing anything till the weekend, I've got a few days. And he says, well, you want to go try to find this thing? And I said, sure, let's go. So we immediately, he called up the manager and got a cash advance, and we went to the airport. We flew to San Antonio, we rented a car, and we drove down to Eagle Pass down at the Rio Grande, and went to Mexico. And left the rental car in Texas because you don't want to take it, to Mexico. And we got a taxi. We went over to Mexico into the city, and it took us about an hour and a half. But we went slowly up and down the streets. And sure enough, here was this thing down the street, and had a crazy sign on the roof. It said "Back from the Moon." And this thing was just the craziest. And you'll see the photo. It's in the show. It's one of the publicity shots as well. And we found the thing, we paid the guy some money, and we went for a little ride with him, and we found an interesting spot on a street, and we had brought an outfit for Billy to wear, and we got him dressed on the street, and I put baby powder on him, and got him all dirty and made him look dirty and dusty and whatnot, and we shot him with this vehicle. And while we were shooting it, when I was putting the baby powder on him, I was blowing baby powder into the wind, and some of it blew down to this little guy. He had a little taco stand about 10 feet down where we were. And it enraged him, and he was all wild and jumping up and down and yelling because we'd ruined his tacos or whatever, So Billy went over and gave him a $100 bill, and he was very happy. I think he'd done more than he'd done for lunch. So we proceeded with our photo session, and that was a really fun time. When we were driving to Mexico, we drove for like an hour and a half. To this, it was obscure. It was Eagle Pass, and it was Piedras Negras on the Mexican side, and there were no restaurants or anything. And we stopped at a little guy had avocados for sale, and we bought some avocados, and we went to a gas station, and they had white bread. Was all they had was loaves of white bread. So that afternoon we had raw avocado on white bread sandwiches, and I remember I ate half of mine, and it was like 100 degrees, and it was nasty. And I remember throwing it out the window, But I remember there being buzzards on the road, eating animals, and we had to stop and honk the horn to get the buzzards to fly out of the road so we could proceed down the road. It was pretty crazy, but but things like that. It was an adventure. When we were leaving Mexico, we saw this little stand, and this guy had these big sombreros, and we were laughing about it, and we said, we should buy 3 of those sombreros. We'll use them for something. So we bought these 3 big sombreros and brought them back. And about 4 months later, I shot the album cover for Warner Brothers. And ZZ's manager wanted to do this session with them in Western outfits in the desert and do this session. And we did the whole session like he wanted to do it. And then Billy and I brought out our big Mexican hats and these crazy flight suits and stuff. And we just did this thing on a whim at the end of the other session. And lo and behold, our little funny session ended up being the album cover. And those hats that we bought on a whim ended up being, on the album cover and whatnot. So one thing, always leads to another, and, that's how things happen.